In the last 5 years, Sony has really broken ground into the mirrorless DSLR style of video camera, and today we're going to break down one of their more popular cameras, the A7 IV. In this quick video, I'm going to give you 5 fast facts about the A7 IV. Thanks for tuning in today, guys. Quick reminder that there is a free video gear guide linked in the description below if you're shopping for new gear and want to make sure you get the right thing for your specific situation. Overall, the Sony A7 IV is a very budget-friendly camera that gets you into the Sony E-mount lineup and gives you plenty of capability for both stills and high-quality video. So let's jump in. All right, first is the Sony A7 IV can do 4K at 60 frames per second and at 422 10-bit color depth. What this means is that whether you're shooting at 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second, or you're stepping up to 60 frames per second, you're not going to be limited in what you can do in post with that footage. This is really advantageous, especially if you shoot weddings or other documentary work where a lot of your footage is in slow motion. You're not going to have to quote unquote step down the quality of your footage for those shots, which is really, really valuable in a camera like this. The other valuable piece of information about the resolution of this camera is that it can oversample. Oversampling is essentially where the camera can see a higher resolution image than what it's going to record to. So what that means is your details and your edges and your colors are a lot finer than they would be if it's shooting 4K, but it can only see 4K. It's seeing 7K and stepping that down to 4K. So if you're shooting at 60 frames per second, it'll step up to a 4.6K oversample, but you have to shoot at Super 35, which is going to be a little bit more of that widescreen, look than a standard 16:9. And then if you're shooting at 4K 30 frames per second, it'll give you a full 7K oversample without having you crop it down. All right, number 2, speaking of what you can work with in post, this camera has 2 types of codecs internally to record to. One is called XAVC-HS, which is what we would call a delivery codec. This is what's used by those prosumer level cameras that are recording internally to SD cards. So if you've shot with other prosumer level cameras before to SD cards and you're right around that 100 megabit per second data rate, you're familiar with this type of codec. It's still very editable. However, it's not going to give you the same level of flexibility as a intra-frame codec or an intermediate codec, which is going to let you change things a lot more drastically when it comes to white balance and exposure without seeing artifacts or straining the image. The nice thing with the A7 IV is it does have an intermediate codec built in called XAVC-S1. This is up there more in that 600 megabit per second max. So that's too fast to record to most SD cards, but you are going to be able to get a lot out of this image if you want to really take it in post with heavy grading, or you want to make up for bad lighting. It's going to let you cover up a lot more mistakes and or take this footage in a more artistic direction, just simply because there's more data to work with inside every frame. All right, next, number 3, if you're familiar with Sony, you know one of their hallmarks is fast autofocus, and that is a huge feature of the A7 IV. Not only is the autofocus fast, but it's great for tracking autofocus, especially for eyes. It has, for video specifically, an eye tracking algorithm built in, or AI, whatever, and it's going to do a great job automatically tracking and identifying your subject in the frame and following them, whether they're moving side to side or forward and back. This is great not only for documentary work and run and gun work, but also for live broadcasts if you're doing stuff on stage at a church or an other live event where you don't have to constantly manipulate focus. You can trust the camera to do its job. Another benefit of the autofocus in this camera is that you can actually set the speed of the refocus time. So what that means is that when the camera is changing its focal point or searching for focus, it can based on what you tell it, change the speed. It can do it really fast so you hardly notice that focus changed, or it can do a little bit more of a subtle movement. For a video like what I'm doing right now, I'd honestly want to set it for a slower refocus time so that you're not really able to tell when the camera is pulling or pushing focus, but that lets you have the flexibility for the camera to kind of mimic a human operator when it comes to tracking focus. All right, next, number 4, this camera has a 5-axis internal stabilizer on the sensor. This has been a mainstay feature since about 2018 or 2017 when it showed up in the GH5, and it took a while for companies to be able to afford to put a sensor stabilizer in a larger sensor camera. Sony's use APS-C sensors for a lot of their lineup. The A7s are actually full frame. And so the A7 IV getting a 5-axis stabilizer was a big step for them because it's there's just not as much room to put stuff and the sensor is bigger. So it's a harder task to do for the engineers, but they figured it out in this camera, and that is gonna let you shoot handheld way, way better. If you're not familiar, what a 5-axis stabilizer does is it essentially compensates for those small movements your hands make when you're kind of trying to either do a slow move or you may be walking softly, and it's just going to give you a chance to have it be that cinematic and smooth shot like you're using a Steadicam or gimbal. Again, for the versatility of this camera, that's a great feature because if you're doing run and gun work where you can't always be on a gimbal, this is going to really, really help your footage come out the way you want. All right, lastly, number 5, what does this camera cost? Well, it's a base price of $2,500, so it's firmly in that prosumer level, but under $3,000 price point. I think it's an outstanding value to get this camera body for that price. But there's a big caveat here, and what that is the lenses that go with this camera are not cheap. Once you step into the full frame sensor world, which this A7 IV is, you're gonna be in a different class of glass, so to speak. Full frame glass is the most expensive you can work with, but it is also the best quality and it gives you the best focal properties. So there are some cheaper lenses you can get that are E-mount that will go with this camera, but if you're gonna get their flagship f2.8 lenses, and there's a few primes and zooms, those are each gonna run about $2,200 to $2,400. So you're essentially doubling the cost of the camera if you don't have an E-mount native lens already. The good news is if you have EF mount lenses from Canon stuff, you can get adapters. But again, if you're stepping into the full frame world for the first time with this camera, you need to plan on investing in good glass. All right, guys, that's 5 fast facts about the Canon A7 IV. I think it's a great multi-use camera if you do videos, if you do stills, and if you do video, it can work in a variety of purposes. So if you're on a marketing team at a company, or if you do indie work, this is gonna let you do pretty much anything at a high quality level. Again, if you're shopping for the right gear for your situation right now, make sure you check out the free video gear guide linked in the description below, and make sure that you check out the courses and resources that are linked as well. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.